It is almost September, and that means we are inching closer and closer to NHL training camps. I'm back with another edition of the SherwoodFord GIANT Offseason Questions. There's not that many more days truly left in the offseason, but there is still time for the Oilers to do something, and that's why today's offseason question is, what could the Oilers do in the next couple of weeks leading up to training camp? There are still some roster moves that need to be made by Oilers GM Ken Holland, and I do expect him to make a few transactions over the next couple of weeks, starting with a potential free agent addition. When you look at who's left in terms of forwards on the free agent market after Phil Kessel signed with Vegas last week, there's actually still a lot of pretty decent options. That group is headlined by Evan Rodriguez. The forward scored 19 goals in 82 games last season with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he showed that he's more than capable of playing with skill. He spent a lot of time with Sidney Crosby. I view him as a player who can step into really any team's top nine and make an impact. Could he be a fit in Edmonton? Potentially, but I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe goes somewhere where there's a more clear-cut role for him. When you look at the Oilers forward group right now, if they run with Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, and Ryan McLeod down the middle, that leaves 6 spots in the top 9 for wingers. Those will likely be taken by Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Evander Kane, Zach Hyman, Jesse Puljujarvi, Kyler Yamamoto, and right now Warren Foegele's under contract. Even if they move Warren Foegele, Dylan Holloway could potentially have one of those spots, so I'm not sure if Rodriguez would view Edmonton as a place where he can get guaranteed minutes in the top 9. There are some other intriguing forward options out there on the market. Sonny Milano is only 26 years old. I see him as a guy who could definitely score 20 goals next year if he's in the right spot. Daniel Sprong is a player who could fit in a bottom 6, and I think the Oilers should be looking at him. And I also think they should take a peek at Zach Aston Reese. He only scored 5 goals last season, but he's not one of these guys who could be looking for a top 6 role. He's more of a fourth-line winger. He plays with a bit of physical bite as well. I think he brings the Oilers some things that maybe they're lacking on their fourth line right now. I think the Oilers should be looking at Zach Aston Reese, but the number 1 free agent target and a player that I do expect them to sign is Sam Gagner. This guy's had a really productive season in Detroit. Granted, he was playing in the top 9, but one thing he did a lot in Detroit, he killed penalties, and that's another thing he could bring to the Oilers. He can slide up and down your lineup, and yes, it would just be a great story to see Sam Gagner come back to the place where he began his career, potentially play his 1,000th game next season. I think the Oilers should be looking at Sam Gagner and Zach Aston Reese as 2 forwards to target. I also wouldn't be surprised if they brought in a veteran on the blue line. Now, I love the name Calvin DeHaan. For me, he's the best of the remaining free agents. He can play the left side or the right side. He can handle strong defensive assignments. He can help out on your penalty kill as well. I think the Oilers should be looking at Calvin DeHaan as a veteran insurance option if Philip Broberg or Dmitry Samorukov don't make the team next year or aren't ready for full-time NHL work. I would say it's unlikely that they target a guy like DeHaan, though. I think it's more likely they go down the list a little bit, and maybe they look at someone like a Ryan Murray, who was a very capable 7th defenseman on the Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche last season. I also think they look at maybe Danny DeKeyser, who I've brought up in a few of these videos, or Ben Harper, 2 guys who you're probably not trusting with everyday NHL work, but they could be solid vets. They could come in and compete in camp and up the overall competition level for the few weeks of training camp, and I think they'd be solid 7th defensemen who, again, don't need to play every day, but you know you can trust them with 15, 16 minutes a night when you do put them in the lineup. It'll also be interesting to see what happens with a guy like PK Subban. I don't think there's a fit in Edmonton right now, but hey, what if the Oilers were to look at moving on from a piece like Tyson Barrie in order to get themselves back cap compliant? That money they save from Barrie could potentially be enough for them to sign a guy like PK Subban, get Ryan McLeod's new deal done, and still add another piece to the forward group on top of that. So Subban, not a fit. I knew people would ask, but maybe if things break and the Oilers make a trade, Subban would be a decent third pairing right shot for them. The other area I wanted to touch on were potential trade targets. If you're sitting there holding your breath for the Oilers to make a big trade, I don't think you should be, is the point. Patrick Kane, yes, there could be some interest there, but all signs are pointing towards Kane staying a Blackhawk for the start of the season, and trade talks will probably heat up closer to the NHL trade deadline. That's going to do it for another edition of the SherwoodFord GIANT Offseason Questions. The question was, what could the Oilers do in the next couple of weeks? The answer is, look for 1 or 2 forward adds and a defenseman potentially on a PTO.